Okay, so Dead Space, guys, a game in which one of my favorite horror movie games or horror franchises when it comes to the gaming industry. And for those of you guys who, once again, are kind of new to my channel, I'm obviously really into filmmaking, but I'm really when I was doing filmmaking and making short films and such, it was always based around horror. Movies and short films. And so I really have a passion, and I kind of, it's like just something I really enjoy is playing games that are on the scary side, I guess you could say, or kind of horror based. Gears of War would be probably a good example of a game that's somewhat like a horror-esque kind of game. But Dead Space is one that is completely 100% delved into the horror genre and is definitely labeled that. Well, anyways, Dead Space, guys, we, of course, have had 3 games up to this point, and there's been no word of there being like a sequel. There actually has been talks of maybe it could have a return at some point or another, but at this very point, it seems pretty much that it's in a limbo state. There's really not a lot of news or information. Well, an article that I came up across was from Gaming Bolt. A guy named John Canties wrote this article about Dead Space, and it goes as follows. One of the best horror franchises of its time is now little more than a distant memory. What happened? So fans of survival horror didn't have a lot of modern choices in the previous gaming generation. Resident Evil 4 had come and gone a few years earlier, and outside of a handful of mostly unremarkable underground experiences available here and there, which mostly limited the PC, it was slim pickings for us horror fans before Amnesia came out and revived the genre and elevated it to the glorious relevance we find it at today. But there was one game developer that saw that void and wanted to fill it with something special. So in 2008, Dead Space blasted and dismembered its way onto the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC via Visceral Games. So it goes on to say, guys, that Dead Space, it featured a mix of of gore, a lot of disturbing imagery, but it was very different. And I gotta say, guys, there was some very unnerving elements of the game. That being like you would be walking down very narrow hallways. You would kill like a necromorph that was in front of you, and then you would turn your camera around because it was a third-person shooter horror game, and you would see that there was something behind you, and things of that nature made it very unnerving. The game also increased immersion by displaying stats on or around Isaac within the world, eliminating the need for much of a HUD at all. Dead Space never tried to be pure horror, though, and definitely straddled the line between horror and action, as many survival games do. But it did lean heavily in the horror direction, contrasting itself from most similar games of the time. So, basically, why after the series gained so much momentum in such a short period of time did the Dead Space completely fall off the map? Essentially, what happened to Dead Space? Well, part of the answer to this is probably embedded in that criticism of the third game, which of course he kind of mentioned a little bit earlier. Dead Space was an overall solid series that did sell and review well across the board, but the once perfectly balanced horror to action ratio did see a very slight gradual slide toward action through the main trilogy. In Dead Space 2, it was barely even noticeable, as the mechanics and gameplay from the first game was almost entirely untouched outside of Isaac controlling a little snappier and ammo being made a little more plentiful. Isaac was more of a character in Dead Space 2 as well, and actually had dialogue, which some players liked as it made him easier to care about, but others disliked as it demystified the tone of the game and divided focus away from the atmosphere. Either way, these changes, while subtle, did make Dead Space 2 feel a little more like a typical sequel than a return to the strange cryptic experience of the original. So, okay, so what he's saying here, guys, essentially is that really there was changes that happened between Dead Space and Dead Space 2. I kind of disagree with that, and I'll get what Cruiser thinks about this here in a sec, but I really think that it was actually 2 to 3. I think that 3 was really where it kind of changed. The second one I thought was actually it topped the first one, in my opinion, as far as the horror elements go. I thought that they kind of knew what they were doing by the time they got to Dead Space 2. And when they went to Dead Space 3, that's where things changed. It felt a little like they were kind of going a little more into the action segment, or kind of moving more into an action game over that of a horror game. But really, all in all, guys, in my opinion, and obviously it's just my opinion, we are all allowed to have our opinion, I actually think that what really, the problem with Dead Space was more that they kind of were a little bit behind the trends of what was going on in the gaming industry. So back then, guys, the thing was multiplayer was starting to get pretty big, and Dead Space and games kind of like it really lacked having any type of multiplayer experience, and let alone co-op. And we didn't get a co-op Dead Space game until Dead Space 3, which felt a little bit, a little bit too little too late sort of kind of mindset for a lot of people. I also think, though, that what ended up, happening was they went a little bit away from what made the game great in Dead Space 3, making it more of an action-esque type of game. It's really unfortunate because I thought that Dead Space 1, Dead Space 2 were incredible. Dead Space 3 I thought was good, but it was definitely far inferior to the first two. But I think that there's a ton of potential here. If they were to make another one, a Dead Space 4, I really feel that this could be, it could really rejuvenate and revitalize the franchise, in my opinion, with having a multiplayer, a co-op mode, and a good immersive story. I think a lot of us would love to see the continuation of it. Cruiser, you hear these things, you hear kind of what one man's thoughts is, in this article, and then you hear kind of my opinion on what I think kind of happened with the Dead Space franchise. What are your thoughts on it? Do you think that that this is a franchise that, really should just kind of stay to the wayside, doesn't need to come back, or would you like to see it come back? And where do you think they kind of went wrong?
Well, so I jumped into the series after all three were out, and what happened was I actually ended up just grinding the first two, and I really, really liked them. And then I got to the third one, and I had kind of known some reviews, and I ended up never playing it. So I can't really give my thoughts on the third one. The first two I loved, and I think it came down to them working on, because I want to say they were working on a Star Wars game, right? When they were shut down, it was actually supposed to be a really good Star Wars game.
Yeah, so I think I'm pretty sure that they were working on, something. It was definitely Star Wars. It was like an untitled Star Wars project, but yeah, got completely shut down. I believe it was by EA, who was the ones who I believe owned them, and they shut down the studio while they were right in the middle of making the project.
Yeah, which seemed kind of odd because there was just a little bit of concept, and everyone was really hyped around that game. But either way, I kind of think that they would have gone back to it had it not shut down. I think it was more of a just sidestep. Hey, now we're trying to do Star Wars. I mean, when you think about it, EA really has not done a lot with the Star Wars franchises. So I think it was more like, hey, we got to push out a different kind of style of game for that. And then maybe they would have gone back. And now that the studio is gone, it's sort of up in limbo. But, they just recently announced Vince Zampella is going to be taking over the DICE LA studio and rebranding it and everything. That would almost be a perfect opportunity to jump back in to something like Dead Space. And when you look at someone like Vince Zampella, who's basically made nothing but good games, it kind of gets me excited if that would be a possibility of them making a new Dead Space. But I guess I don't know. I feel like there's definitely room for a new game like that, and I think there's enough fans. They made 3 games. It's not like there wasn't a fan base for it, and I know a lot of people that especially love those first 2 games. So I think it's something that we're gonna see eventually from somewhere. I don't know if it's gonna be that new studio or what, but
Yeah, I mean,
kind of
I would love
excited
to
for
see it. I mean, I feel to me it feels like it definitely can coexist with these other games that are out there. And I mean, we look at there's single player games that have come out that are only single player that have done really well, like God of War, that amazing Spider or what was it? Yeah, the Spider-Man game. There's been games that have come out that can. That can be successful by just being a single player story. The problem with Dead Space is it's horror, and the horror genre is a little bit different. It's probably not as popular as some of these like action games and such, and that's probably why they were thinking let's go in a direction of action. I just don't even think that was it. That was the problem. The problem to me was that sure you're moving away from horror, but the big thing is that you don't have a reason for people to come back to the game. You don't have a multiplayer. You don't have, I mean, you got co-op, but you don't have other modes. Like, you think of Gears of War, or you think of Call of Duty, you think of games that are big AAA games, they have multiple reasons to come back to. You play the campaign once or twice through, then you come back, you play the multiplayer, which is what you mainly are going to probably be playing. Or you have like other, co-op modes and such like Horde mode in Gears, or Spec Ops in COD, or Zombies in COD, or it would be so easy, in my opinion, to do something like that with Dead Space, because you got all these different kinds of creatures and imagine like a horde mode in Dead Space. I mean, that would be nuts. I mean, I think it would be really cool having something like that. I mean, would you want to see something like that? Like, because it reminds me somewhat like the creatures and stuff kind of sometimes, some of them at least, look similar to like some of the creatures in like Gears or some of the other horror games that are out there. I mean, do you think that they could expand upon like what they're working with it? Like, do you think that they could, I mean, I feel like they could easily do something, and I agree with you with Vince Zampella. I mean, this guy is like really, he seems like a genius when it comes to just gaming in general as game development goes. I mean, we're talking Modern Warfare 2 being one of the creators of, Modern Warfare, and then moves on to do Titanfall, and then you had Call of Duty, like basically over at Activision, those guys were like copying kind of what he's doing with Titanfall, and they create the jetpack era in Call of Duty, and now he's, into Apex Legends, into, the new Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Like, he's really got his handprint in that stuff. I mean, I would feel absolutely great if he had access and control of what was going on with Dead Space. I don't know if that's what he's thinking. I feel like he's going to try to do like bigger spectacle stuff, but if he did, I would feel really good about it. But do you think that Dead Space, they could easily like probably do like modes that would keep people coming back, whether you're talking, even if it's not multiplayer, like some type of co-op mode that you're mowing down waves of necromorphs or something, right?
yeah, they could definitely do something like that. I mean, and then you look at like, I want to say God, I don't know for sure God of War, but I know like Spider-Man, they have those Game Plus modes where you basically replay with like, I don't know, different things going on in the game, or like I think sometimes you keep like what you've unlocked through the first playthrough, so it kind of gives you a reason to play through again, maybe being a little beefier, and maybe encourages exploring different areas and stuff like that that you didn't hit in the first playthrough. So even something like that at least gives you a little bit of an incentive to go, gives it some replayability.
Right. Yeah, well, listen, guys, these are a couple of people's thoughts on this situation as to what happened to Dead Space. I mean, when you really think of the question as in what happened to Dead Space, there's probably a number of different things that could have been, that could have happened, or that could have kind of tied into the reasoning Dead Space right now is in a limbo state. But we would love to hear from all of you. What are your thoughts about Dead Space? Would you like to see the series come back? And do you think that Dead Space, if it were to come back, it would be somewhat successful? Do you think they need to continue onwards or move in a direction that they were kind of left off on, as in an action kind of genre where they're trying to move in that direction? Or do you think they need to stick to the roots of horror? Let me know what you guys think. I would love to hear your thoughts.